Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, which I guess I've said like 500 times now. Today, our guest is V.E. Schwab, whose latest novel is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, published here in America by Tor, one of my favorite publishers. And now I guess it's an imprint of Macmillan, published in October. Victoria is a world-renowned author of young adult fantasy, and that includes big kids, little kids, and old kids. She also writes adult novels like this one, the Shades of Magic series, and the Villains books. So, Addie. She lives in Bayonne, France. She was born in 1691. She has a wonderful father, a woodworker, and a mother who loves her, but in a 1691 kind of way. She has a type of muse, Estelle, and she's trapped. It's way past the time to get married, so a match is found. But Addie has a mind of her own, and she determines to escape her fate. So for good or for bad, she makes a deal that all of us at one time or another in our lives think about. But she makes it with Lucifer regarding her soul, immortality, freedom. Yeah. And it's there that we, in a very real way, begin our journey alongside her, through centuries and continents, through love, through art. And we have someone else with us on that journey, someone who lives after dark, who in many ways is the night itself. And we meet so many people, Henry, Robbie, Bea, Sam, Remy, Toby. And the thing that is quite nice for us in our lives and in this book is that we remember all of them. So, hi, Victoria, and so nice of you to come today.
Hi, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you for the warm introduction.
My pleasure, too. So, since you like animals, do you want to know the animals I have?
Yes, I absolutely want to know the animals you have.
I have a cat, I have a dog, I have parakeets, I have goats, I have alpaca, I have chickens, I have a Napoleonic rooster, I have hateful peacocks who hate me. When I got them, I didn't know that they lived to be 42, so they will come to my funeral and laugh at me. And I have a family of mice who have a little house under the floorboards with a kitchen and a rocking chair and a daily newspaper, and they like peanut butter. But only the
I love everything about this. Can I just tell you, this has already made my day so much better.
Great. So, but enough about them. Perhaps we could talk about your book. Oh, two more things before I let you speak. I just interviewed this guy, David Farrier, a professor in Edinburgh, who wrote this book called Footprints in Search of Future Fossils. But I know that you spend a lot of time. I mean, that's your home.
Yeah, I live in Edinburgh. I mean, when I'm in France right now and have been for the last almost 8 months because of lockdown, but I normally reside in Edinburgh, so that's awesome.
Yeah, David Farrier. It's a really good book.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I feel I've always been the person with the most animals in the room, and now I just feel woefully lacking because I have 3 dogs, 3 cats, and 6 chickens right now. And that always felt like quite a menagerie, but you have me just completely put to shame.
My partner, when she walks our dog in the morning, well, actually, she does all the work, everything. I just sit here. But when she walks the dog, she has a sling, and she walks the rooster in the sling.
Of course she does.
And then on the way back, she lets him out of the sling, and he just walks back with her.
I just have so many questions about the mouse family's kitchen and furniture. Did you make this or acquire it?
Well, I think it's in my mind, but
okay.
But it's not really because, well, I made this like little planter, but we never use it, so I put this piece of wood over it, and they come out of a little hole at night and go into the pantry. But I'm not afraid, but intrigued to know what's underneath that wood, and it reminds me of the old cartoons where the father mouse is sitting in a rocking chair reading the newspaper. I think it was in Pee-wee's Playhouse, maybe. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah. That makes it a little less weird because I thought that you had created a dollhouse for these mice. But I'm the same way in that in Edinburgh, the buildings are all quite old. And so you're prone to get mice, even though I live on the 3rd floor. And I remember that I kind of had blocked the exit. A mouse had come up through the floorboards one night and I kind of had cornered it. And then I I had it closeted, and then I worried that it wouldn't be able to get back to its mouse family. So then I unclogged the floorboards and just hoped that it would find its way home again, because I had spun out this very elaborate tale about how the other mice were really waiting for it to come back with a share of food. And it caused me, I couldn't sleep that night. I was too worried for it.
Okay, I feel better now since we both kind of fictionalized it.
I do love that you have peacocks that you don't realize were going to outlive you.
Oh, plus the white one is okay and the peahen's okay, but the India blue one,
They're so mean. They're so mean.
He does hate me, and I do hate him. But we hate each other so much. We hate each other so much that it's kind of a love. You know what I mean?
I get that. I have a weird relationship with our chickens in that I really don't like them. They're not mine. They're my mom's chickens. I really don't like them. And they remind me of dinosaurs. And the way that they come at me is very much like raptors. And it makes me deeply uncomfortable because my mother has trained them to come for treats. So that as soon as you walk into their garden, all 6 of them just charge at you. And they will like jump at your fingertips and bite your fingertips thinking that they're grapes.
Well, if you're talking about dinosaurs, take a look at the legs of a peacock. Jeez, it's just like you're in a movie.
I really envy your alpacas, though, because I went to an alpaca farm a few years ago, and I just think I was mesmerized by how quiet they are. It's eerie.
Everybody says, "Oh, they spit, they're mean." I said, "No, that's llamas." And no one knows that. And so the alpaca, they're so gentle and kind and meek, and they only eat a half a cup of food a day.
And their eyelashes are so long.
I know.
They just seem quiet, peaceful creatures. I love it.
Okay, well, wait a minute. One more thing.
Yeah.
So have you ever heard of a book called The Invisible Life of Ivan Iseneko?
No.
Okay, it's by a guy named Scott Stambach. It's like your book. You will never, ever, I promise, ever read another book like it.
Really?
Ever.
All right. Okay, I'll have to check it out.
The Invisible Life of Ivan Iseneko. And
I should be able to remember that because it's got the same title for the first half as mine.
I know, because I thought, well, she must know about this, but then it's...
No.
Yeah.
Well, and also that's the weird thing. You know, people have brought up that book, and people have brought up, I think it's The Sudden Appearance of Hope by Claire North, but I've been working on The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue for a decade, and it's always had that title. And so I think it's just an indicator of those kind of zeitgeist moments, or of these ideas which are archetypal in a way, and, you know, draw our attention and kind of captivate us over time.
He's the guy who wrote it he's in a group called Science for Monks, and he teaches physics and astronomy. Anyway, so you'll read it. And
I'll read it.
I'd send you a copy. And also back here, this guy Stan has your book there.
Yeah, I see that.
But I didn't get, I listened to your interviews, and I didn't get any fancy arc with silver and you signed and an extra short story. And then now I look on A Books, and it's already up to $90.
Oh, we can fix that. Don't worry. We'll find a way to. Well, see, this is the problem, is that I had 2 weeks before release 0 copies of my book because of all the printer delays and everything like that. I was starting to get worried. And then 2 days before release, I got 120 copies of my own book delivered in all of its different forms, and now I'm inundated with so many more copies than I require.
Oh, you should. Do you have it at hand so you can show it up, the title? I mean, the cover?
Oh, yeah.
Because mine doesn't, I had to print mine out.
I've got multiple editions. This is the Barnes & Noble one, but you can see it's gold. It's pretty. And then I've got the UK editions, which are shiny and have different patterns on them. There's 7 different editions around here. It's very strange. I shouldn't have that many editions, but I am quite happy with it because I always wanted a gold cover. So
since you're showing the cover, so if we can start, before you start talking actually about the book, let's talk about Freckles, 7 Freckles, and Constellations, and why Act has that.
I am a little bit face blind. And so when I write characters, I try and give them a visual shorthand. So in the Shades of Magic fantasy series, Kel had a red coat. And, there was always Lila had a black mask. There was always some way that I could create a visual shorthand for the readers. And so for me, I knew I wanted to give Addie these freckles for multiple reasons. Some shallow, like wanting readers to just have a really simple visual cue, but also because she over the course of history realizes that she can be interpreted through art, I wanted to give her an element that could then be interpreted through art. So even when abstract artists render Addie, I wanted there to be some continuity of form, some idea that they could interpret. And giving her a constellation of Freckles was something that I could then see being transmuted across different art forms in different ways. And so even if it looked nothing like her, we could still understand that a reference was being made to her identity.
And that leads directly into this concept of, which was great, of beginning all the major sections of the book with a work of art. And many of the reviews have discussed this, but how did you go about doing that? And how did you come up with such a, I mean, there's obviously a connection between all those pieces.
Yeah, so I'll like hold so you can see, like, this is the UK edition, so the art is different, but like, so each one has a didactic and a piece of art. And, you know, that was actually something that got added in revision, not the works of art, but the decision to make those works of art interstitials at the beginning of each section. The works of art were always there, and they became kind of, there's a line in the book where Addie says that sometimes she feels like a museum that only she can visit. And I felt like having these art didactics, 7 of them throughout the book, created a little bit of a museum exhibit for the readers, created a sense of how Addie archived herself through history.
Yeah, there's something about, well, your books are exactly the perfect example. When you're long gone, your ideas carry on, and that's, you have lots of other opportunities and choices. Addie didn't really have any.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea anyway, but I think as well, you know, because she can't rely on other people's memories of her, because she has an eidetic memory, her engagement with art almost becomes like reliving memories with old friends. You know, when you're catching up with a friend you haven't seen in a while and you say, oh, remember when we did that? Well, if you don't ever have anybody else to ping your memories against, she uses the pieces of art to confirm that she's real, because she needs to see some kind of material relic to make sure that she's actually existing.
It was funny too, because the first one, I immediately Googled it, and there's nothing there, and all that comes up is Addie LaRue. And then I thought, oh, that's, Addie must have had, and then I realized, wait, I'm putting myself in the book, because I Googled the real world, but she comes up, so I'm thinking, wait a minute, so Addie, and then I realized I was inserting myself in the book, which
that's the idea. Yeah, and it's interesting, reality and history was a thing that I knew I wanted to play with, but the way I over the course of drafting, and that in the beginning I thought, okay, she'll be kind of a Forrest Gump of art, right? Like, we'll see her intersecting history and reality, and then it kind of limited me in ways that I didn't love, and I didn't want to make everything fictional. So essentially all of the works of art in the book are fictional, but half of the people she interacts with are real historical figures, and half are fictional. Half the places she goes are real and half are fictional. And I tried to write them all in the same tone and style, so that you as the reader are left almost assuming it's all real or it's all fake. And then you realize there are pieces of the story that are real, and it forces you as the reader to go, wait, what else is real?
Yeah, I know. All of a sudden there's David Bowie. All of a sudden there's Diderot, Voltaire, Wolf Hall. And then I really felt bad for Beethoven, because, I mean, if he makes a deal like that, he shouldn't have been deaf.
Yeah.
You know, make the deal, you know, that's not fair.
The deal, I mean, it's pedantic, right? But like the devil points out, it's all in the semantics, it's all in the wording, and you can't really ask for multiple things. It's all, you know, one thing you're asking for. So you can either be the greatest, one of the greatest musicians of all time, or you can have another advantage. And that was an interesting one. Beethoven was not the original musician that I was going to use for that. I was going to use Schumann. And I spent all of this time researching deaths to find a creative who died in the last week of July in history, so that I could have it line up with one of their anniversaries. And then that scene ended up happening later in the timeline, after the devil begins visiting her in other seasons. So I was then freed up, and it became a different character. It became Beethoven, but it was really fun to pick. Sinatra was probably my favorite throwaway one to pick, because Sinatra did have this really strange about face in his career where it was tanking downward. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he just exploded again. And his career had this incredible resurgence that I just was too tempted by. I just thought, oh, we've got to claim, interference on that one.
I know, it's like in the scene in The Godfather when the horse is in the bed. But then see, also you confuse me too, because I should have known it, but A History of the World in 100 Objects. I'm going, oh, okay, I got to go see if Addie read that. And then I realize, oh, it's true, it's there.
Yeah, that's a real book. I mean,
yeah, I know.
And but half the places in New York City that she goes are real places. There's a map online that Tor put together of the different places in New York City that Addie LaRue goes, and showing which ones are real and which ones are fictional. Because the Laundromat, which is this speakeasy arcade, like video game arcade or pinball arcade, absolutely real. The Artifact is not real, but the High Line on which it's set, of course, is entirely real. The French restaurant is real, but then the club is not real. Some of the art galleries are not real. But
the abandoned subway stations,
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And of course, the Echo Chamber, the Whispering Gallery in Grand Central Station is real. Like, it's one of those. There's one in London as well.
I know. I've taken my kids to that for years. And also, if you have a new girlfriend or boyfriend, it's the perfect place to take them. And I interviewed JoJo Moyes, and it was either me before you or you before me or me after you, or I got confused or something. But in that, she has a bad boyfriend take her there, and she's all. It's a really good thing, like when you first meet someone, you go, you like oranges? I like oranges.
It's that and I highly encourage people to go look up Atlas Obscura, which has an incredible database of these secret places around the world. So yeah, it was a fun thing to think about, because I think so much of Addie's life is about finding newness, about this idea that you can live for so long and still be mesmerized by the things that you haven't experienced. And it's one of the reasons that she loves cities so much, is because they're so big and so constantly changing that she never feels like she gets to the end of the story.
It's really cool. Our bookstore got named in Atlas Obscura as one of the 62 best bookstores in the world.
Nice. I would feel like that's like the biggest accolade.
One, I would maybe kind of like you. I'm going, why would they pick my store? It's like.
I love it though.
You have to come to it someday.
I'd love to.
Because that's part of the other thing, is that she loves books, and.
I had to put a bookstore in there. For me, that was just a love letter. I write fantasy, and I have very little opportunities to give my moments, to give myself. That was a weird thing about this book, is usually I write, world building systems and magical systems, and all of that desire got transmuted in the course of this book to writing settings, to writing places. And so getting to create, whether it was the Fourth Rail nightclub or whether it was the Last Word bookstore, inspired by so many of the bookstores in New York City, I just got to create wholesale these tapestries of things that I love, and getting to create a bookstore and then have Book the Cat in it. There was just, for me, that was a safe haven in a really tumultuous sea for her.
It's funny. Noble and Books A Million, and then there's my store, which I tried to make kind of like a Diagon Alley kind of store.
Yeah.
But then the stores I really like are the ones that the books are just stacked all over the place and they're falling over, and there's a cat. But I can't put a cat in my bookstore because the health inspector won't let me.
Oh, yeah. Well, I live in Edinburgh, and I think about half the bookstores in Edinburgh, any of the used bookstores feel like that, where everything just feels stacked precariously, and there are little corners that you discover that you didn't know were there, and there's like a little chair wedged between two towering stacks, and it's very much sit at your own risk.
Well, I do have really nice chairs, but then one broke and I needed to get a new one. So I went to this furniture store that I hate. It's called Raymore and Flanagan. They're in the United States. Yeah. And I said, I want to buy your ugliest and cheapest chair, preferably dented or dinged. And they gave me this chair. It was like this really off green leather, but it was all messed up, and it looked like you'd find it like in the 1950s. But everyone loves that chair, and it's in the corner, and it's just where everybody goes to sit.
I think it's a little bit kind of like sometimes we're scared of newness and we find comfort in the worn and the used places. Because I think the same way with notebooks, where I get really daunted by blank paper, but the moment you scribble across it a little bit, then you feel at home.
Yeah, I know. It's like Henry's notebooks, right?
Exactly.
All empty against the wall. And I have the same thing. And then any notebook that I do fill in is like lunch. $2.32 tip. And then, it's like, I don't think that's posterity is not gonna.
I'm counting in my direct vicinity, 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 10 notebooks within arm's reach. And I still have written 7 notes to myself today on random Post-its and slips of paper instead. Like, I don't know what it is. The same way I struggle to have an office and actually write in it. I struggle to write on anything that has been designated for writing on.
But then if you see a notebook you really like, then you buy it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I use these ones that are, what's this company called? The Mincing Mockingbird. So like because I write for TV as well, so I need to kind of have like different brain spaces. So I have one that's called Obsessive Lists. I have one that is business bullshit. I have jittery scribblings of an overly caffeinated introvert. My creative ramblings of a restless mind. And this is my like habit tracker, and it's misadventures in exotic lands. Like there's just a stack of them.
What's the name of the company so I can buy them for the bookstore?
It's the Mincing Mockingbird. It's actually a collaboration. And the Frantic Meerkat. So you see if I hold that up? It's the Mincing Mockingbird and the Frantic Meerkat. And they're just delightful. And they, you know what it is? I'm left-handed and they don't have spines on them. So they fold completely, they fold completely open and flat. So I love them. And they hold up really nicely.
I'm always whining to everyone about how I'm left-handed and scissors and irons and all that. So I told my daughter to get me a left-handed screwdriver the other day, and she's just confused.
Well, I'm constantly smearing ink on everything.
I know, but you still love it though, being left-handed.
Oh yeah, I love it. My handwriting slants in a really odd way, and it makes me happy. But I will say that when I find notebooks that actually feel nice to write in, and I don't have to like write backwards in them from the back to the front, that's why I've been probably shopping at this place. I'm not like an ambassador for them. They don't pay me or give me any discounts. I spend an egregious amount of money for them, but I love them because they feel good. So whenever I need more notebooks, I order like $100 worth of notebooks from them.
Maybe you'll become an influencer now.
God, that's all I want. I keep tagging them in everything. I'm like, come on, guys, let me have a free journal once and now and again.
Oh, maybe if you send them the fancy silver one that I don't have, book, do that. So can you imagine yourself, like I said in the introduction? Is there any tipping point that you would have where you might consider making this kind of?
Yeah.
Well, really?
Absolutely. Really? I have I'm very much Henry from the book, The Human Boy, because I just have like this fear. Every single time I bend down to tie a shoe, it feels like the world skips, a mile ahead. And I think I know I'll never live to write all the stories I want to write. I know that I read that article a little while back that told you, like, even if you read from now through the rest of your life, the number of books you would actually get through. And I just found it so horribly disappointing. And I think one of the reasons that I wrote Addie LaRue finally is because I spent 8 years aggressively not writing it because I was enamored with it and I didn't want to mess it up. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm going to die without writing this book. Like, it's going to be a book that I talk about. I just did an interview recently with a radio station, and she had interviewed me back in 2016, and she pulled up an audio clip of me talking about Addie LaRue, and I was like, oh my God, I literally was not going to write it. And I think I'm just incredibly aware of the minuteness of a human life, like the brevity of it and all those things. Anything I could do to give myself more time, I would probably sell my soul for.
Yeah, it's funny because the difference in our age is little. Everyone says, enjoy yourself because it's going to move really fast. And then when you have kids, they go, enjoy your kids because before you know it, they'll be in college. But they never, and I didn't, and of course you don't believe it because you don't believe it. You're young and summer lasts forever and ever and ever. But now they never tell you that not only does it go fast, it goes faster and faster. So now that I'm 68 years old, You can't even imagine. I'm telling you now, so you'll know 60 years old. It's going to go so fast.
See, but that just scares me more.
Well, it should scare you.
But I've had an unconventional. I'm 33 now, and I know a lot of people spend their 20s in a specific way. You know, it's the time when you live and you make mistakes and you just like frolic. But I've been a published author since I was 21. Like my 20s were most people's 30s. So I just feel kind of discombobulated because I'm like, are these my 40s now? When do I get my 20s? Like, when do I get to have the frivolous experience?
Yeah, except for the fact that in your head, you have all the time in the world because look what you've done. So you got to look at it that way too. The stories you have they're out of time. They're not in time.
It's weird. I'm 20 books in, and
it's amazing.
And I'm still afraid because I still know I can't there's not enough hours in the day. I can't get to the things I want to write.
Where are all these stories sitting? You don't have space. Where do you put the card?
So I think of my brain like a 6-burner stove, I often say, which is that at any given time I have one project on high heat, but I have 5 projects on low heat. I have this wall. It's like see my little board? Yep. And that's where I keep all of the projects that I'm supposed to be writing. So books, comics, screenplays, and short stories. And I just there's just not enough hours in the day.
That looks like the most organized thing you have.
It is. It's the only organized thing I have. The rest of this place is chaos. Absolute chaos.
Well, so I love the High Line. You obviously love the High Line.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you love New York, but you have Nashville, you have Edinburgh.
I lived in New York. I've lived in a lot of places, but I lived in New York when I was a younger writer. So I was like 23, 24. Could not make it. I mean, I don't know what it is that compels authors to try and make it in New York City as though we need to be physically close to publishing. We absolutely do not. But in the year I was there, I was completely broke. So I became really fascinated by things I could do for free in New York City to try and get some semblance of a New York experience, because I certainly wasn't living there in a time or in a fashion where I could, go to the theater, where I could go out to nice restaurants. I really couldn't even make rent. That was half the problem. And so the thing I love to do is walk and wander and get lost on purpose. And that is something that I gave Addie. And so even the walk that she does, it takes her several hours across New York City through the boroughs. I've done that walk. I have walked almost every inch of Manhattan because I just like seeing things and like moving. And I feel like the only time my mind is still is when my feet are moving. And so I gravitated towards Prospect Park and towards the High Line and towards Central Park and towards anywhere I could walk, any bridge, anything that I could do on foot.
Yeah, and the thing about New York is you can, like she says, and because when you go out, there's always something that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
You turn down a street that you've never been on, and you don't know when did that street get. It's like Steppenwolf. You don't know.
Exactly.
Hey, how do you have time to read?
I read about 100 books a year, between 100 and 120 books a year. I consider it part of my job. I make time for it. Yeah, I mean, I think as writers, the thing that frustrates me more than anything else I hear from other writers is when they say, "Oh, I don't have time to read. I have a book due." And I'm like, that is exactly why you should be making time to read. If you're not feeding your creative well, if you're not looking at what other people are doing in the sense of being informed and being creatively whole, you're going to be working down a narrower and narrower road inside your own mind. It's diminishing returns. I mean, it makes me annoyed when writers of one genre only read that genre. It makes me annoyed when writers of a genre stop reading altogether. It seems to be the first thing that goes from so many creatives' lists when they have to cut something. But I feel like the best education you can ever get is reading. I didn't get a graduate degree in writing. I got a minor in writing because I just kept taking classes in it in a way, but I never set out to receive an education in writing. And I would argue that the best education you can get in writing is reading diversely. I read as much poetry and historical nonfiction as I do fantasy.
It's so funny because I'm writing down these notes because I'll forget everything. People will come to my bookstore and they go, "I love books, but I just don't have time to read." And I go, "We have the same there's the same number of hours, so we both have exactly the same amount of time. But if you're watching the Keeping Up with the Kardashians, then that time is gone. But you can't.
It's a choice.
Yeah, everything is, and it's just like, and the other thing about bookstores, which you know, is that when you come in looking for a book, and especially if it's a used bookstore, you're going to see that book that you find, but you're also going to see the book on either side of that book.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
my favorite part. I haven't been in a bookstore in 7.5 months, and I feel as the way, because I've been on lockdown in France, and I just feel as if an entire part of me is missing. I just feel so deeply bereft for that part of me, because that's like my joy came from two things, like sitting in a corner of a coffee shop working and going through bookstores. And in Edinburgh, we have so many incredible bookstores. And I would either be on tour and going into bookstores, or I would be at home in Edinburgh going into bookstores. And I feel like I've been severed temporarily from an entire piece of my quiet, my calm. For me, it was a meditative practice.
I know. And it's funny here in the States, bookstores are always treading water. If a book owner tells you he's making a fortune, he's lying. It's just obvious. But the thing is, now that we've opened 4 days a week at shorter hours, we're making more money than we made when we were open 7 days a week. Because like you're
funneling.
You would be there in a minute. And what's cool about bookstores, most bookstores never have more than 10 or 12 people in it anyway. So you're kind of social distancing per force. And it's funny because when I was in college and I was majoring in English literature, and I never did any work my entire life in any school. I don't think I ever did any homework, and I never highlighted any word in any book ever.
Yeah.
But when I majored in English literature, I got all A's, and I was thinking I was so cool. But then I realized you read the book and you like it, and then they give you tests where they ask you questions about the book.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, that's a great irony, right, of becoming an author or a bookseller. I feel like in that way is you've just signed up for voluntary homework for the rest of your life. I mean, like, I've just voluntarily signed up to constantly be writing either book reports or books. I've chosen this for myself.
Yeah, I know. And all my friends are reading Cliff Notes or Spark Notes. And I go, why don't you just read the book?
Well, have you heard there's like an app now which will, instead of reading a book, you use this app that basically summarizes the book in 15 minutes or something. And you're like, what was the point? What was the point of the book then?
Well, I don't know. I sell books. There's no point.
Exactly.
I can't answer some of those questions. All right, back to Addie. We've got to get back to the book. So when you were talking about you were broke, what if you're broke for 300 years? Because you're not remembered, you can't get a house, you can't keep your stuff somewhere. So talk a little bit about how Addie progresses from not being able. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Addie lives over the course of 300 years. Addie is a young woman. So she's already fighting against a tide of autonomy happening. She can't exactly move through the world with the same freedoms and the same lack of scrutiny, but at the same time, she is forgotten. And so she finds this really interesting balance where, I mean, she can't die, but she can suffer. So she feels the pangs of starvation. She feels the cold in winter. She longs for creature comforts. And so a lot of her early years, that first 100 years, is about finding every crack in her curse to find out how she can create some form of comfort for herself in this life. And so, she discovers that she can steal if she can get away with it, because a successful theft has no owner, has no perpetrator. And the whole thing about her curse is that she can't take credit for anything. And so she begins to twist and test and has to enter a space of moral liminality by virtue of trying to survive with any. I look at her 300 years as broken down into almost the 5 stages of grief for one's own life. She goes through this anger and this denial and this fight. And finally, by the time she's in New York City, has reached a kind of what she believes to be acceptance with her curse, which is, of course, shaken thoroughly when she meets a young man who actually remembers her. And she realizes she's not nearly as at peace with being forgotten as she had thought she was.
One of the reviews was going like, it was so stupid. It was going like, well, the book is kind of slow until she meets Henry. And I'm going, no, it's not. It's not slow at all. It's
300 years.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. And
But,
it wasn't,
yeah.
the thing is, it was all leading up to that moment. You didn't know what the moment was going to be. You didn't know, and thank God I read the books before I read the reviews, but you didn't know what that moment was going to be. And I didn't know, and I didn't know. And then when it happened, I could say it because it's not a spoiler anymore because the reviews say it, but I hate that. But anyway, so yeah, and the other thing about Addie is, okay, she's your heroine, you love her, she's great, but then what you do forget about is all the things she stole. Even the carton of the poor guy's noodles that he was delivering, he's gonna get fired or whatever. And then, you know, the last part where you realize, okay, she's an admixture of things now, is when Luke says, okay, I'll make a deal with you. Just point someone out.
Yeah.
And she
Choose
does.
someone else.
And she does.
I mean, he has groomed her. The devil has groomed her over 300 years. She is no longer human. He has forced her into a world that she doesn't fit into, and she can't make fit to her. And so she's had to change in ways to fit to it. And she makes, morally dubious decisions. It comes all the way back to the 1750s in Paris when she's sitting in like a marquis's bedroom eating chocolates, and the devil points out to her, who do you think is going to get whipped when the chocolate jar is found empty? Like, who, you are taking from other people. Just like the fact he put her in that position. She did not ask to be forgotten from the world. She asked for time and freedom, and he twisted that in a manipulative way because he's the devil. But yeah, I wanted to make her a morally gray character. I think those are the characters that speak most to me, but also flaws are what make us human. And as readers, I don't think we interact with a character and say, oh, that character's super strong, I totally see myself like that. Like, we interact with a character and we see ourselves in their flaws and in their weaknesses. That's what makes them, for better or worse, human.
Yeah, and it's funny that, like that, the fanciest dinner that they have, and then she says, send them away because they're just standing there slack-jawed. And then I was thinking, what's going to happen the next day when they come back home and all their food, all of them are going to get sacked. Yeah, so it was kind of, and that was interesting because you don't expect to kind of, well, here's the other thing is this. So as things progress, and eventually I started thinking, okay, maybe Addie is going to become one of those gods after dark.
Yeah.
Maybe
she's not human anymore. That's kind of the devil's entire argument. And it's interesting because by the time she meets Henry in 2014, she's an incredibly selfish character because she's had to be. When you don't have anybody else to think about, how can you be asked to think about other people? Like, you're moving through the world, universe of one. And so she actually struggles even in the most mundane ways to be a good partner because she has to learn to think about somebody else in a way that nobody's ever learned to think about her.
Well, a good one is there's several of these characters that she repeatedly visits, has relationships with, but they don't know they're having a really. Toby is a really good one.
Yeah.
And also it's a different type of art. So do you know that song? Can you?
I have no musical. Well, I'm learning music for the first time this year, but no, thank God, I cannot. I seem to put music into almost all of my books, and I think it's because up until this year, I never played an instrument, and so I always considered music to be a kind of supernatural power. I mean, if you think about it, the ability to put fingers on strings and create something world-shattering out of such a mundane action. So I think I always try to include music just because to me it seems like magic.
Well, so talk a little bit about how in Addie's life and discreetly with regard to Toby, how you'll come home with someone, you have a wonderful evening, you go to sleep, and the next morning you would expect.
It's one night stands, right?
Yeah.
She can never have breakfast. Like she says this, she dreams of breakfast because when she goes home with somebody, the only kind of intimacy she can have is physical, right? She isn't been given the gift of emotional intimacy. It's not that she longs for only physical intimacy, but it's better than loneliness, she says. It's better than nothing. She would rather feel present in someone else's life for a short amount of time. And so like with Toby or with Samantha Benning, who's another artist in the book, she dated them for months. But for them, she was just a one-night stand. And so she goes home with them and she has intimacy sometimes or falls asleep with them other times. And then they wake up and they don't remember her. It happens with Remy. It happens with Toby. It happens with Sam. And that's a devastating heartbreak every time because she's such a relentless optimist. She's such a relentless romantic that all she thinks is like maybe one time they will open their eyes, they will roll over in bed, and they will look at me and they will say good morning instead of who are you?
And that's what happens.
Yeah.
And it's very magical. But the thing about Toby that is the clearest one, I think, is that over a period of time, he does remember her. And when he's asked how the song came about,
she discovers, and weirdly, she discovers it when revisiting her home village and planting an idea in somebody's head there. But she begins to discover that ideas are wilder than memories. And while she can't make anybody remember her, she can make them remember something, especially if it's a thing that can attribute to their own imagination. So in that way, she becomes quite a literal muse for artists. She becomes somebody who personifies their own imagination and their own art. And so with Toby, who we meet in the first chapter, she is teaching him a song. And she's just reminding him every morning when he wakes up and doesn't know who she is, oh, but you played this song for me last night. And then she helps him create a little bit more of it, and he writes a little bit more down, and he assumes that it's his. And so even though she becomes kind of a vacant space in his mind, he is aware that there is a space there that he can't account for, that he calls the muse, or that somebody calls their imagination. And I had been reading Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert when it first came out, when I was working on this idea. And she talks a lot about an idea as a personified thing. Obviously not a new concept, but I just have always been really taken with the idea of a muse as an entity, especially as an author. We can't always figure out the exact source of our inspiration. Sometimes it does feel like we have stumbled on something and we've forgotten the how, and all we care about is the what.
Yeah, and it's like and this is where I'm going to try and stay as far away as I can from spoilers, but yeah. I'm definitely going to. But I mean, so you have these number of chapter headings that have a description of a piece of art and its value, or its intrinsic value, or its value in dollars. But the last piece of art, it's not there.
No. And I think that's like the thing about the art in this book is what's missing is just as important as what's been chosen to be described or to be portrayed. And that's why I think there are two pieces that have no monetary worth or that are difficult. And one is a reflection of Henry in part 4, and one is the last reflection of Addie at the end of the book. And I think that it's important, like that's one of the reasons I wanted to include the material cost of a project or its worth, is this idea that it's not about creating something prized in the material sense, but it's about the diversity of that art that she leaves behind. I mean, we see pieces from sketchbooks, and we see, almost architectural articulations, and we see sculpture, and I haven't even included, I mean, I had to pick 7 because there are 7 parts, but there are obviously supposed to be many, many, many more pieces. That these are just meant to show you the basic constellation.
Yeah, unless she had more freckles, but I mean, it's stuck with 7. Yeah, you've read the Neverending Story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, the thing about it is, and one of the many reasons why it's a wonderful book, especially, and all your books can be read by everybody, wherever they stick them. I have YA books that I put on the front table because I'm not thinking of them as YA books. I just read it. But, no, it's like this kid comes into my bookstore and he's like 10 years old and he wants a copy of War and Peace.
Mm-hmm. And, I love that, though. I had a kid come up to me, a 10, 11-year-old boy come up to me at a book festival, and I held out my hand expecting him to hand me one of my middle grade novels, and he handed me Vicious, which is like the first book in my villain series, which is deeply violent. And his father was with him, and he was like, hey, I'm just really glad that he's reading it and loving it. And I think a lot about the fact that, like, yes, okay, I write for children, teens, and adults in terms of where they place in a bookstore. I have just as many adults reading my children's books as I have, young teens reading my adult books. I don't care who reads what, as long as they find a story that speaks to them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like, with that kid, and I'm not like patting my own back, it's just an example. I didn't charge him for the book. How could I possibly charge him? And then I gave him another book by Tolstoy because I try to be like Addie. He may remember, well, he will remember me, but I'm trying
He'll remember that.
Yes, he'll remember that.
He'll remember that. And I think that's so much more important. And as somebody who has kind of a really terrible memory, I always like to joke that it's because I spend so much of my time in fictional worlds that I just am not terribly good at reality. But like, I often forget those details, but I never forget how I feel. I never forget how something made me feel.
The other way I look at it too is, and I've done this myself, is that you can create little time machines in your life. Like, I remember when I was a little kid walking home from school in the summertime, and I said, and I can remember exactly the sidewalk, the little embankment, the street, the school, AB day. Yeah. And I said to myself, okay, I'm always going to remember this. It's like
I do that.
I can go back to it.
Yeah, it's like taking a snapshot, a Polaroid without the camera.
Yeah, so you have a time machine.
I love that. I've done it. I don't do it very often. I feel like I do it more as I'm getting older and as my family's getting older. But I do it, definitely. There are times when I just think, this is important. Remember this right here. And it's interesting because for me, it usually ties into my fiction in some way. I mean, I remember when I first got the idea for Addie LaRue, I was sitting at the very top of a very large hill on a rainy day in the Lake District in England. And I was just very cold and tired. And I thought to myself, and I was looking out at a vista with no people in it, just a vast landscape. And I thought, this is what it must feel like to live forever. And like, that was the first moment. And I remember sitting here knowing, like, I don't know what's going to come out of this moment, but like, I have such a deep, solid memory of that moment.
That's so funny. I live in a house, for you in France, is not old, but it was built in 1775.
Oh, cool.
So when I sit in front of the fireplace, it was just gigantic. I realize I'm sitting on top of 6 generations of people who sat in front of the fireplace thinking exactly the same thing that I was thinking. Or if I go down to the pond and sit at the pond, I realize they're all here.
I love that, though, because the first time I ever concretely engaged with history, because the United States is quite young, my mom's English. And so when I was 12, maybe, she took me to England for the first time, to Canterbury, where our family's from. And I went to a little graveyard and I walked through it. And I remember thinking, every single tombstone here is older than my country. And I could just put my hands on them. Like, I could just touch the tombstones and know, like, that there was that much age and that much antiquity. And now my family lives in a 500-year-old stone cottage, and in the balcony, in the stone terrace, there are stones that have been taken from the church that was here, that was torn down during the 100 Years' War. And there's 1364 has been carved in to one of the stones, and another stone has a cross from the church, and there are hack and slash marks and bullet marks and all of these markings that if you run your hands over it, you are literally touching history with every single step.
It's like also in France, if you go to the catacombs, all of those heads, all of those skulls have the same universe.
Yeah.
And you go, oh
my favorite thing about the catacombs is the anonymity, though, right? Because I went to the catacombs on a research trip because one of my middle grade novels is a ghost series that's set there called Tunnel of Bones. And the thing I was most amazed by is, like, there are famous people there. You don't know who they are because the skulls all look the same, but like the amount of history. I mean, what is it? 2 million or 6 million bodies, which translates to more than 1 billion bones in the streets under Paris, under your feet.
I know. And if you look at the skulls, you realize there's someone there you would have fallen in love with.
Yeah.
Who would have been the perfect person for you. And now I'm getting depressed.
No. It's grounding. I think it's the same way that, I mean, maybe it's a bifurcated relationship, right? But like, I think some people look up at the night sky and it makes them feel small in a way that terrifies them. And some people look up at the night sky and it makes them feel small in a way that calms them. And I think it just depends on the mood that you're in or the headspace that you have. But I, for one, have always looked up at the night sky and felt small in the best possible way, which is that, like, whatever I'm feeling, whatever I'm going through is a speck inside of a speck inside of a speck inside of the universe. And I love that. I think it can be grounding. And yeah, sure, it can be scary or sad, but I think it can be beautiful too.
Yes, I have. When I was between the ages of 18 and 25, and in several different types of altered states of mind, I understood that exactly and much better than you could ever possibly understand it.
I'm sure I've understood it at times in my life thus far.
Well, the other thing is Addie worries a lot about the night sky because she can't see the stars. It's not the same.
Well, and also, I mean, we've been the devil. The devil in my book is not actually the devil. He's an old god, and he's a god of night, a god of promise and potential. And I mean, one of the reasons that Addie is unnerved by this night sky is that she can feel him looking back at her. Whenever she looks up, she feels surveilled. And in sometimes in history, that has made her feel less alone. And sometimes in her present, it has made her feel terrifyingly vulnerable.
Yeah, and also in lots of ways, the subject of possible trickery, which is another thing without any spoilers. I mean, trickery can go both ways.
Of course. But also, I think something that I love about making him the god of night is, I mean, I'm somebody who's always felt like the world is a different place in the dark. Like it literally feels like, if I were to compare it to music, it is the world rendered in two different instruments, right? If it's a guitar during the day, it's a violin at night. It feels to me like I'm living in two worlds. They do feel completely distinct. And I don't know if that's because, you know, I grew up in kind of a rural space where you could feel the differences in the air. But even when I've lived in cities and when I go for walks at night, I just feel like I'm moving through a different world.
New York at night, just the sounds alone. And everyone says I couldn't live there because it's so noisy and all, but those sounds are like so comforting to me at night.
Oh yeah. It's weird when you are in a space after. I remember when I moved back home to Nashville after living in New York, how eerie I found the night. Because it was so much quieter. And I just thought, this is unnatural. And now I live in a place where, I mean, you can see the Milky Way at night because it's a tiny, tiny ancient village where the lights all go out at 10:30. And I mean, you can't see your hand in front of your face.
Yeah, seeing the Milky Way or not seeing it and having seen it before it's a revelation.
Well, and that's Addie's point, right? She lived.
Right, exactly.
I mean, I set the village where she's from about 10 minutes from the house that I'm talking to you in now. So, like, I know exactly the kind of sky that she would have seen. And to go from seeing that sky to seeing no stars is like the world painted over.
There's a book about some guy who spent his entire life finding the darkest places on the planet. I don't know if I interviewed him or not. But yeah, he finds the darkest place that he can find. And that's what his life has been devoted to, which is interesting.
You mean in terms of light pollution?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But, you know, in terms also of spelunking and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, no. I couldn't do the spelunking. I can be under the darkest night sky possible, but I have enough fear of being buried. I want to go spelunking.
I know. I had an experience kind of like that and pretty much scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, that's a hard no for me. I have gone to the edges of the world. I love the darkness, but I would like to stay in the airy dark.
Oh, so you've had this thought about, like, if you were like going through a cave and you got stuck in.
Yeah. Let me put it this way. I have that thought enough that I would not be in the cave in the first place. There is nothing that gets me into a cave.
There would be a place where you would make a deal. If you got stuck. Well, that's the kind of Henry's deal is kind of like that because, you know, Addie says, "Why did you ask for so little?" Yeah. And he says, "I would have asked for even less."
I mean, that's a mental cave, right? When you're at the complete end of your rope and you can't imagine surviving one more day, you'd sell it for an hour.
I know. It's interesting because you being stuck in that cave going through a tunnel, is that worse than the other? I mean,
in the moment, no. I mean, it's weird because like Henry is the character in the book who deals with mental health, mental illness, anxiety, and depression. And I have far more anxiety than I have depression. But the great lie that your mind tells your body in those times is that it will only ever get worse. You'll never get out of the cave. So like whatever terror you're feeling, whatever horror you're feeling right now, that is the best you will ever feel from here on out. That's the lie. And so, that's what Henry's faced with in the book, is the lie that as terrible as everything is, that's the best it'll ever be.
I know.
I'd sell my soul in that moment.
No, it's this idea that it's like one of those movies or where the diabolical guy puts people in the room and then the walls start closing.
Saw, yeah.
Yeah. And, it's like, the walls are not going to go back out any further. They're just going to keep coming in closer and closer and closer. And there's nothing to do except make whatever deal you can make.
And I think it's really hard if you don't struggle in some way to make sense of that. I've had many conversations with my parents trying to explain to them, like, it's just a lie. And that's the truest thing I ever gave to a character in fiction was the idea of storms that I gave to Henry, which is that over the last decade or so, I've learned to think of mental health in terms of storms, and this idea that, when one blows through your head, it can feel awful and it can be terrifying and violent and it can cause damage. But the thing about a storm is that it always passes by its nature. Like, you have to batten down the hatches, you have to do whatever you can to get through it, but knowing that it's never infinite, it's never endless. And I think I gave that to Henry because that to me is probably the most comforting thing I've been able to find for myself about it.
Yeah, it's funny because, and I've been through it. It's like the worst thing you can do, and with my kids, and I've done it too, is saying something like, why can't you just be happy?
Exactly.
Why can't you just get over it?
Or it's not a big deal. And it's like, well, but in that moment, it's the biggest deal. In that moment, it's everything because, we only have one body, sure, but we only have one mind. And to be stuck sometimes I feel like it's my brain hijacking my body. And when your brain is hijacking your body, I think it feels like a betrayal so deep. Like, you can't get away from either of those things, right? It's not an external thing that you just need to walk out of the room. You are trapped inside that room.
No, there is. All you have. Oh, yeah. I've been interviewing these guys that have been these really academic guys who've been writing books about consciousness and all that. And I say, well, what if it's just a solipsistic universe? And they get really mad because it screws up their whole.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking to them, or they're talking to no one. But they refuse to acknowledge the possibility that it could be. But if it is, it doesn't make any difference anyway because I'm not talking to anyone.
That's the thing, right? It's kind of like string theories in physics where you can get into it, but also how does it matter in relation to the immediate you? Like, it doesn't. Does it change the way you engage with this world, whether this world is, a Matrix-esque fiction of your imagination or not? Like, you still are engaging with it. There's no way out of it.
Well, it's like you said about your own life. Your fiction versus what you're not even sure. It's not as real.
Exactly. I end up in that loop all the time to the point where I have like these memory gaps about my life that other people have to fill in for me because I know I was present, but I wasn't mentally there. I was mentally working on a story.
You ever think that someone's writing you?
God, I hope not. I'm a terribly written character.
Oh, what else can we talk about? We've been talking an hour.
Yeah.
Have we talked enough about the book?
I think so. I don't want to spoil anymore.
No. Well, no, I haven't spoiled nearly as much as the reviews.
No, I know. I want to make sure. The only thing that could be considered a spoiler is the Henry deal.
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about it. I didn't.
You mentioned it.
Oh, that was really stupid. Why didn't you stop me before? Want me to take it out?
Because it feels organic. I mean, no, I think it's been out for a month now. It gives people a chance. But I think that's the only thing I even consider vaguely spoilery because it doesn't happen until like part 4. And most people don't see it coming, which I always think is interesting. But no, at your discretion. I don't mind either way.
It'll be kind of mushy to take
Yeah, it got mushed in with everything else, so I wouldn't worry about it. And I think we talk about the anxiety and depression. I think it's really important, so I'd rather leave it in.
Yeah. There was one other thing I was going to ask, but now I can't ask it.
What?
Well,
you can cut it out if it doesn't work.
No, it's just about milky eyes. You know, about milky eyes and why you see them that way.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I just always see it as like a fog. Something that's a barrier that only Henry can see. And I mean, not to be too trite about it, but we do write about eyes generally as some way to connect with people on the deepest level. You look somebody in the eyes, you make eye contact with them. Eyes are the doorways to the soul. All of these truisms, but I think one of the ways we connect deeply with people is through eye contact. It's how we feel seen. And he literally feels unseen by everyone.
I know, and that's the thing about COVID now. With people wearing masks, you really realize sometimes, and then you don't know whether man or a woman is beautiful or handsome anymore. You can only impute it.
Well, it's also really interesting because a friend of mine who's non-binary said that they've received a lot less harassment since having masks out in public because they said there's something about the eyes which tell less as well as more, and they're receiving far less antagonism, which is such an unusual thing.
Well, it's even like in your FAQs in your website where you talk about why you're VE instead of Victoria, or why Addie dresses up as a guy and can do so much more.
I mean, it's interesting, though. I did choose to give Addie extremely feminine features so that she couldn't pull off that ruse. Because I feel like if I was Addie, I would just be like, well, screw this. I'm going to be dressed as a man for the next 200 years until things get a little better. But I gave her features that don't to that illusion in daylight. So I didn't want her to have that easy, that out.
It's interesting what you do because, in my mind, I do have a picture of her. Mm-hmm. And she's beautiful. She's really beautiful. And the freckles make her more beautiful in my opinion.
I agree. I mean, I always assume she's gorgeous. The thing is, the weirdness about Addie, right, is I feel like while she is cursed to be forgotten, when you're in the room with her, she's the most memorable thing there. That's the nightmare of it. The reason she becomes this muse, she has an absolute magnetism about her. But that's the irony, is the magnetism severs the moment she's gone.
I know, it's like B when she sees her. Each time she sees her, you look. I see.
She thinks she's a work of art. I mean, you meet people like that, right? We see certain actors and actresses. We see people in our daily lives where we just think, I can't stop looking at that person. They're just spellbinding. And I feel like I always envisioned Addie as somebody spellbinding, and that was the great sadness, is that what does that beauty do for her? I mean, it helps her become a muse for artists, but it doesn't help her with any lasting human connection.
I know, and it's interesting how if you're in the room with her, she's there, but if you close the door, she's not there, which I talked about rooms closing in when she's in a jail cell. Except
unfortunately, she's in a jail cell at a time when people don't really care the faces of the people in that jail cell. She is just a body in that jail cell. And so her anonymity is absolutely to her disadvantage in that moment.
I know. And she could be there for a really, really, really long time.
Yeah. And she thinks about that. I mean, I think about that, if Addie were buried alive,
God.
because that's the whole notion of that curse, is that she can't die, but she feels like she is. It's one of the reasons that drives her to do those morally dubious things, is because human suffering I mean, there's no reprieve. And I think the cruelest thing I ever did to her, you learn very, very early on, is because she can't die, or because her suffering almost becomes like mental, she walks for an entire day to get somewhere, and she can feel like her feet are falling off, and she's not even developing calluses. So nothing gets easier. This idea of like, there's no way for her to inure herself against pain through the familiarity of it. It will always be fresh.
Right. Which is the only reason we exist, is because we can't remember pain. If we remembered pain, talk about going mad.
It's completely fresh. So she knows no matter how far she walks, no matter how tired she gets, she's never going to build up those calluses, mental or physical, against the world.
It's funny. I wonder if we ever ask for the right thing, ever.
No. I mean, the devil would say no.
That's true. It's funny. It's like one of the many, many wise things my father said, which could be attributed to you as well, is that whatever you do, don't do it for money. The money can be important. It could be right up here, but there has to be something else that's more important.
I mean, according to the devil, everyone wants glory. Everyone wants to be remembered. And it's one of the reasons he's not so good at predicting Addie's reactions to the curse. But like in his mind, humans only care about glory, whether that's money, whether that's fame, whether that's immortality in the artistic sense. All they care about is how they're seen.
Yeah, it's like with cars. I've never had a new car. I've only had old cars. And when I see someone like driving a Lamborghini or Ferrari, I feel like I don't want to park diagonally at the end of the parking lot. And I know the first day I'll get a scratch on it and I'll be miserable.
Yeah.
And why am I driving it anyway? What exactly would be the reason why I would do that?
Yeah. And yet to some, their outward possessions, that's the only way they feel like they can be judged, right? I think we're scared. So many people are scared to be judged for the truth of their character. And so they would rather be judged for the size of their house or the car that they drive or something that they can control, something that they can put on as armor.
Which is a good way to end it, because basically that's what's happening to us today as we speak.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a fear of being judged honestly.
Okay.
All right. On that super chipper note.
Well, this was great.
This was a blast.
I know. And everybody, this book is on the front table, like I said, but it's also back there in the back too. And your other books are in YA or they're not. I move them around.
I love it. I love it. Just they feel like mischief ridden, right? They're just always showing up in different sections of the store.
Oh, well, my daughter, when she works at the store, she's I hope they don't hear this, but she's like my best employee. I hope my other ones don't. But like, she doesn't stay behind the counter. She can't stay behind the counter. If someone comes in, she runs out, she'll grab your book and she'll go, "You have to read this. You have to buy it." And
that makes me so happy.
And the thing is, she's good at it. She tells them, "You have to buy this." Yeah. And then they buy it.
Yeah.
Ask me to. You're not paying me enough.
You can tell her I agree.
Okay, well, thanks.
It was wonderful talking with you.
Likewise.
And fingers crossed for sanity and ground.
Yeah, we'll do our best. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.